Hello and welcome to this latest edition of Top of Mind Florida. Michael Williams here.
And I'm Brian Crowley.
Cycling nut that you are, and me. And so
well, I think we're amateurs compared to this guy.
Yeah, compared to our guest today, Mark Hassell, Billbone Bike Law, Bike Investigator. I did not know there were bike investigators, but with our cycling community, we can use it, right, Brian?
Oh, I think we have investigations going on constantly around
That's
here.
correct.
Tell us about the work you do.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I do appreciate it.
Another cycling nut, by the way.
As a bike investigator, our Billbone Bike Law, we specialize in bicycle accidents involving cars. People have hit road hazards, potholes, things like that. And being a lifelong cyclist, I have kind of an insight of what people experience from how an accident happens, but also what happens after an accident with medical treatment and things of that nature. So I just find out what happened, put the puzzle together, as you were, and then present it as a legal case, and then we move forward from there.
How safe is it to ride a bicycle in Florida?
Well, I just saw some statistics that we are no longer number one in bicycle fatalities. I think New Mexico or Arizona has taken over for us, so we can no longer claim the title. But I feel I ride 200, 250 miles a week on the road.
Mm-hmm. Slightly more than us.
Just a little. But yeah, I feel it's reasonably safe. You really just have to be careful that you don't put yourselves in positions of doing something unsafe yourself, and then be mindful of the cars, because there's a lot of people for various reasons either don't want you on the road or just don't see you where you are. So just be mindful of your surroundings.
You've run into that. You and I've run into that.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
The overwhelming majority of motorists, friendly, respectful, and the overwhelming majority of cyclists. But it's the problem when you have motorists who aren't and cyclists who are not, where you run into the problems. I'm assuming you see that too.
Yeah, you can, a lot of us ride on A1A. 10 cars could pass you and give you 3 feet. And then all of a sudden the 11th car comes 2 inches from you. And you're just like, what was the purpose of that? What was that all about? Are they sending me a message that you shouldn't be on the road, or they just weren't paying attention? You cars pass you and you can look in the car. The amount of people on their cell phones is astounding.
I've seen that. So have you, Brian.
Well, and a lot of people, as I'm sure you know better than I, don't understand that bicycles are allowed on the road, that they are considered vehicles on the road. A lot of people, if they want to get cranky with a cyclist, will yell out the window, get on the sidewalk, because they think you're not supposed to be on the road. Why do we have such a misunderstanding in this state about what the basic laws are involving cyclists?
That's a good question. And I think it actually starts with the driver's exam or test for people that are trying to get an initial license or renewing it. There may be, the last I looked, there's usually no questions related to cyclists on the road on a driver's written exam, or maybe there's one. And it's just, they're not being properly educated that we're allowed to use the road. And in some cases, we're allowed to use the entire lane.
Well, educate us a little bit more. Talk a little bit more about the rules of the road and what cyclists are entitled to on that road. And then we're going to go to the flip side of that from the motorists to say, yeah, you want all the rules, but you don't want to follow them. But first, what's the law say about what cyclists are entitled to?
When a cyclist is on the road, they're considered a vehicle. Interesting enough, when you're riding a bicycle on the sidewalk, you're considered a pedestrian. So it's almost like you're never considered a cyclist. You're either a vehicle or you're a pedestrian. But when you're on the road, you're entitled to use the roadway. The law says that you should stay as far to the right as practical. Okay? Doesn't mean you have to be riding in the gutter or riding on the side. Practical is open to interpretation. And then, of course, when a motorist passes, they're supposed to give you 3 feet of roadway or space.
But you're allowed to be in a lane of traffic, the far right lane, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, you are definitely allowed to travel in the lane, but you have to ride to as far to the right as possible.
As reasonably possible. Sometimes it's not possible, so you're allowed to be in that lane.
Right, and in those situations, you are allowed to take the lane.
Mm-hmm. And one of the biggest things I hear when I'm out cycling or see is motorists who, A, don't understand that, decide to sideswipe. Again, that's a minority, but you always remember it because they're the ones who make your heart go in your throat. And in fairness, the cyclists who decide that The Batcave's calling Brian. His cycling mates want him. Boy, you really are an advanced cyclist.
Somebody wanted me to wear my helmet.
Well, that's for the second half of the podcast. What about the rules that cyclists sometimes ignore, like traffic lights, where a whole stream, say it's a red light, but 50 of us will blow through? What about other rules of the road? Cyclists can sometimes be their own worst enemies. I know that when I go up on a stretch, Jupiter, they ask us to go single, be as far over. A lot of people are riding double, triple, and the like. So talk about that piece of it too.
Well, the law recently changed about what the definition of a substandard lane width is. Mm-hmm. And so most of the roads we have are substandard. And so cyclists can't ride more than 2 abreast and impede traffic. But does that mean, a lot of the groups that are out on the road, some of the larger groups are going 27, 28 miles an hour. Mm-hmm. It would be looked at,
That's when I get dropped. I'm a 20, 22, some 23 guy, but yeah.
Yeah, but are they impeding traffic at that point in time? But cyclists should be aware of cars, and I know that when I'm doing a group ride, if there's cars behind us, someone will yell out "cars back," and then the cyclist will move to the right, maybe get single file as best we can, and then allow the vehicles to pass. But we really should not be obstructing traffic and causing traffic backups.
Must cyclists obey all stop signs, all traffic lights, and the like?
100%.
How often do they not?
From just my own personal riding and watching people ahead of me, it's very, very common for cyclists to really, I don't want to say common, but it is, cyclists do tend to run stop signs and red lights. Probably just as much as people in cars do.
Can you be stopped if a police officer was to see you?
Yeah,
you could be stopped and ticketed for that as a cyclist, right?
Yeah, it's a $162 ticket for a cyclist running a red light. Mm-hmm. Right. Now, if a cyclist comes up to a stop sign and they slow, I think, been pulled over before where an officer would say, "Oh, you didn't put your foot down." Well, there's no law that says I have to put my foot down. Mm-hmm. You just have to stop. And if you slow and then you go. But red lights are a different story. We should stop at red lights and wait for it to turn green. Of course, now if you're riding by yourself, depending on the mechanism that controls the light, you may not be able to trip the light. Yeah. If you're on a lightweight carbon fiber bike, you're not going to have enough metal to cause a light to turn green. And then I think the law allows, because it applies to motorcycles, that you can then proceed through that red light in a prudent manner. I mean, you just can't pull out in front of cars, but if you've sat and you waited and the light's not changing, then you can proceed.
Cycling has gotten complicated, or the bicycle lanes and the sidewalks have gotten complicated. We have e-bikes now, we have scooters now, we have all sorts of mechanisms that are people using that can go, some of them can go really fast. I'm not really clear on what the laws are for some of these e-bikes and things that are out there now.
Mm-hmm. We see a lot of accidents with the e-bikes, and there's 3 classifications of e-bikes depending on whether they have a throttle or there's pedals or how fast they go. Your basic class 1 e-bike is one, it's like more of a pedal assist. Mm-hmm. People ride those quite a bit on the road, they ride them on the sidewalk. But there are a lot of gray areas in the law, and there's been several noted accidents with e-bikes recently where different municipalities are looking to try to set something up. But typically at the end of the day, I think the state is going to have to come in and have some more precise regulations about where you can and cannot ride an e-bike.
E-scooters too, that blow through lights and everything else. Does anybody on a bike or an e-bike or an e-scooter, we still must follow the rules of the road, whether you're, because now the cyclists are yelling at the e-scooters. I notice a lot of that. Are any of those categories, any of those cyclists or riders are required to follow the same rules of the road about lights and signs and stops?
Yeah, I believe that it would be interpreted in such a way that if you were riding any type of conveyance on the roadway, you have to follow the rules of the road, same as a car. The sidewalk, you have to yield to pedestrians, but just like a pedestrian comes up to an intersection that has a walk sign, they just can't go out into the road. They have to wait for it to be clear, because there actually is a state law that says a pedestrian cannot leave a curb or a place of safety. So you can't just go out into the road and think a car is going to be able to stop.
I guess to Brian's very excellent point, it sounds to me like we haven't kept up with the state of our law, with the state of cycling and e-bikes. Why not in our great outdoors of the Sunshine State? A lot of us complain that we don't seem to have the proper infrastructure for cycling, that the laws are a welter of laws, that as Brian said, you're like, okay, this law for here, that law for there. Why is that? What are we doing about it?
Well, unfortunately, the state legislator is not really doing much about it. It typically will take something horrific to happen for them to kind of take action. And right now, there's a lot of blowback, if you will, against cycling infrastructure because of the cost and trying to trim budgets and things of that nature. So it's, and I guess things
dedicated bike lanes and the like.
Things go cyclical where there's a trend like, okay, we're going to put bike lanes everywhere. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, we're going to cut the budget and we're not going to have bike lanes. Mm-hmm. And of course, the big mystery is, and it just happened in the town of Palm Beach, the section of road from Ibis Island down to Lake Worth, the state is redoing the road. And there's a lot of easement there, state-owned property. And so they wanted to put a bike lane in. But the residents said, we don't want a bike lane. So they are widening the road to put a 5-foot shoulder, which would be wide enough to be called a bike lane. They're just not going to call it a bike lane. I'm grateful for 5 feet.
Yeah, so much for wanting cyclists.
So, so the state has plans to, by law, when they widen a road or repave it, they're supposed to do bicycle infrastructure, bike lanes. But the law also allows for the residents to give feedback and object to anything that they're doing. That seems to be what we see all the time.
Well, even the bike lanes that exist are often don't feel very safe. I always thought something as simple as putting some bollards up every quarter of a mile that just said bicycle lane on it,
Mm-hmm.
on it or something, so that people aren't drifting into the bicycle lane. That they're often not very wide. You're in 45-mile-an-hour traffic in this little narrow bicycle lane. There seems to be a lot of inconsistency about that. And you don't see very much in the way of, I'll see flashing signs all the time that tell me I should wear my seatbelt. But I don't ever see a flashing sign that says, cyclists are entitled to the road, or beware of cyclists,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. We don't seem to do much to educate drivers and cyclists, for that matter, about what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do in this state. Is there room for improvement there?
Oh, 100%. Better education would be to go. We have a lot of share the road signs on A1A and various locations,
Mm-hmm.
but there's different interpretations for that. I've had people in a car yell at me and say, you're supposed to share the road. And I'm thinking, well, it's the car that's supposed to share the road with the bicycle.
Mm-hmm.
And they're thinking it's the bicycle that's supposed to share the road with the car. Mm-hmm. But it would be helpful to definitely have some signage along the way that would kind of give people, on the boards that they have, the electronic boards, just put something out there that says cyclists are entitled to be in the roadway.
So two-part question. I'll begin with this. Fundamentally, when you show up, you investigate a case. What are the common denominators that you almost always end up saying, that was an accident waiting to happen between car and cyclist, the mistakes made on both sides that we all need to be aware of so we can avoid them? And you've done, what, hundreds, thousands of?
More
So
than
what
1,000.
So what are the common denominators?
Motorists, inattentiveness, and also not realizing that somebody on a bicycle can go 23, 24, 22 miles an hour, and just misjudging, thinking, I can go in front of that person, and not allowing enough time for them to be able to stop. And of course, a real common type accident we have is what we call the right hook, where a person's riding a bike and a car passes them and immediately turns, not giving them enough time to stop, or just realizing or thinking that they could go around that person.
Most common mistakes cyclists make that could perhaps more easily be avoided. And you're a big cyclist yourself, so you see it firsthand.
I would say putting themselves in positions of possibly getting into a crash, like running red lights, things of that nature, passing cars on the right when you don't have a bike lane would be a very common one. Mm-hmm. And then just cyclists in general, just thinking that when they're in traffic, that if a car is slowing down, that they're just going to go around that car, not realizing, that person, because a lot of people don't use turn signals. I guess that would be a huge help.
Yeah.
If people use turn signals, you would say, okay, that car is making a left, I'm not going to go on the left, or they're going to make a right, I'm not going to go on the right. But just thinking that they're just, when you're on a bike, you're free, right? I mean, you're just riding, enjoying life, and like, oh, I don't have to stop for anything. And then, of course, they go around the car, and all of a sudden the car makes a left on.
What would be your personal 5-step program? We're not going to fix everything, but it's a growing cycling community, right? Growing e-bike community, that's fair to say. And not only here, but around the state, I think. Is that fair, number one?
Oh, yeah.
So what would you say if we could all come together, both to Brian's point about standardizing laws and starting to clean up our act and starting to have more uniform thinking about how we improve our roadways for the cycling community? If you had your wish list, what are your top 5 things from law and infrastructure that would go a long way?
Well, the first would be along the lines of education, starting with the driver's test and the driver's handbook. There should be a whole chapter of, cyclists have a right to use the road, and this is what you need to know, and then putting those items on the test. Cycling infrastructure, bike lanes where it's appropriate would be very well. Sometimes you have dedicated bike lanes. Sometimes, and West Palm Beach has done a great job with the green cycling zone lanes and sharrows. Those are very helpful. And then some education, as Brian was saying, along the road, that people realize, whether it's through electronic message boards or other types of signage, that cyclists have a right to be in the road. And then even a little bit further, maybe explaining, about give cyclists 3 feet when passing.
So I've ridden bicycles in France and Germany. I spent some time in Amsterdam watching people riding bicycles, which is incredible. I don't know if you've been to Amsterdam, but it's incredible, isn't it? The way they are, the way everything merges together perfectly. Pedestrians, buses, bicycles, trains. What is it about us that we can't seem to bring cycling incorporated more into our daily transportation habits?
Well, I think, I spent 2 weeks cycling in Amsterdam, Netherlands, big trip. But it's just their culture from the very beginning. As children, they're on bicycles. And that's the starting point. It seems to me in our country, the first thing people want, when I turn 16, I want a car. Nobody's, I want a new bicycle. They want a car. And that's kind of the starting point. There are areas in schools I see where there are a lot of kids that ride bikes to school. Right. When I was a kid growing up, the bicycle parking area of the school had 200-300 bicycles. Nowadays, there's 5 bikes and 300 or 400 cars lined up to pick their kids up. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't have children personally, and I understand that there's always concerns about your child's safety. But I think we've kind of gotten away from, kids ride their bicycle to school.
And before we jump a little more into your background, because I kind of stopped when he said I did 250 miles every week on the bike. I said, oh boy. As far as law, you've talked a bit about it, but moving forward, I will tell you one of the things. When we do see a tragedy, people say that should be treated, frankly, in a more harsh manner for somebody who wasn't paying attention or is inattentive. The one complaint I'll hear when there's a tragedy where a motorist was not paying attention, they said, listen, you just killed somebody on their bicycle, and the penalties should be stiffer for that. Talk about that and kind of that ongoing debate.
Well, I will tell you, in the 14 years or so that I've been working at Bilbo and Bike Law, I've never seen a case where a motorist received a ticket for violating the 3-foot law. And kind of half-jokingly say, if you hit a cyclist, you violated the 3-foot law, and you should get a ticket, at least for that. But in most cases, it's up to the officer's discretion if they're going to issue some sort of traffic citation. And of course, if it's determined that it was, like a manslaughter charge or something done intentionally, then it has to go through the state prosecutor. And most times, it just doesn't seem to go that far.
Plainly put, does the court system and society just not really think that cycling, they don't give it the same degree of importance that if I slammed into another car that way? Are we just not that important to them?
I believe that is the case, and I believe that we, as in terms of the law firm, we always have to weigh very carefully whether we would want to go to a jury trial, because juries, we believe, just would not be sympathetic to somebody riding a bicycle. Their first thought may be, well, why are you riding on the road? And that's kind of what we see it from a perspective of.
Which is a total antithesis of what you talked about that you see in Europe. So how do we begin to change that culture, or really is it pie in the sky to think we can?
Well, I think, if you could start with young children, elementary school, there was a program the YMCA had for a while, bicycle education program. They'd show up at a school with a trailer full of bicycles. If a school had a track or a basketball court, they would get the kids on bicycles, teaching them to ride. And then I think that gives them at least an experience of being a bicycle. And then you translate that to kids riding bikes to school, and they have an early appreciation for people on bicycles because they're out there on a bicycle and they can feel what's going on around them. And as they turn 16 and 17 and they get older and they start driving, the hope would be that they have that memory as a child on a bicycle.
250 miles a week. That's an avid cyclist. Talk about your own cycling and your closing thoughts.
Well, lifelong cyclist. I've raced in France, Switzerland, Brazil, China.
You raced some of those spots too.
I didn't race, but I rode.
Done a lot of cycling in a lot of great places in Europe, throughout the United States. My background was I was the chief lifeguard for the town of Palm Beach.
Okay.
I was on the beach for 27 years.
Wow.
And I met Bill Bone through sponsorship of our cycling team. And so when I retired from being a lifeguard, I had about a 2-year gap of not doing anything. Then Bill Bone said, hey, I have the perfect job for you. And I said, yeah, that sounds pretty perfect. So I get to ride my bike every morning and go to work and help people. So it's been a good ride, if you will, on the bike.
Right.
And your bike is?
Right now I'm riding a Specialized.
All right.
Okay.
Carbon fiber.
Okay.
Very nice.
So.
Very nice. I've got a little tie bike, Moots tie bike, and he's got a nice Trek that you can't miss. That red and white. It's very, very, very nice.
Bright colors these days.
Yeah, yellow jerseys for me all the time. And also, I get one final quick question. People say helmets. I wear a helmet all the time, but by law, you're not required to as a cyclist.
Under 16,
okay.
You wear a helmet.
But your strong advice to cyclists everywhere is
wear your helmet, make sure it's properly fastened, make sure you have it on correctly. I've seen a lot of people on A1A, maybe newer cyclists, have their helmet on backwards. And I will make it a point to turn around and go speak with them and just say, hey, you got your helmet on backwards. I don't want to be like I'm criticizing them. So, but if I could, Mike, I'd like to just say one thing that every cyclist needs to do. Okay. All right. Under Florida law, if you're riding a bicycle and you're hit by a car, you are covered under the no-fault law. And that law says there are specific things that have to happen to have a legal case. People don't realize in Florida, you do not have to have liability or bodily injury coverage. You don't have to have insurance if you run somebody over and you're at fault to compensate them. There's no law that says that. But the law allows you to buy uninsured motorist coverage. So if somebody runs you over, they flee the scene, or they don't have coverage, you can use your own automobile insurance company, even though you're on a bicycle, to provide you with some sort of compensation. So every cyclist needs to look at their automobile policy. We don't sell insurance, but it is something that will protect you in the event that somebody runs you over and leaves, or if they don't have any insurance.
Yeah.
And that may be, at the end of the day, the best advice I can give anybody on the road.
And that is a great spot. And thank you for the advice. Thanks for keeping eyes out for a ever-growing cycling community. And thank you for that advice. And if you see two guys trying to chase you down on your 250-mile trek, it'll be us. It'll be a short chase.
Yeah, exactly. Good luck with that.
Mark Hassell, Bill Bone Bike Law, thanks for being our guest.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Back now, closing thoughts, my cycling friend. I thought that was informative. And as a cyclist who loves my fellow cyclist and loves us all sharing the road, anything that helps us all be a little more aware is a good thing.
Well, many, many years ago, I never wore a helmet. And then one day I'm having just a annual doctor's appointment. Somehow we got on the conversation of cycling, and he asked me, did I wear a helmet? I said, oh, no. Me wear a helmet? No. And he said, well, I had a patient not too long ago who got in a bicycling accident and wound up with a serious brain injury from not. So you really should consider wearing a helmet. And it was just the way he said it.
Mm-hmm.
And from that day forward, I always wore a helmet. Moved many years later, I have a bicycle accident. No car hit me, it was just me being dumb. And my head hits the concrete, and even as my helmet is hitting the concrete and I'm hearing that noise, I'm thinking, thank God I'm wearing a helmet.
Glad I listened to my doctor.
I broke my elbow, but at least my head was okay. So, if you're a cyclist, and you should wear a helmet, and especially, when I often see young kids out riding their scooters and things, barreling down the highway and not wearing helmets. Mom, Dad, tell them to put on a helmet.
Well, it's great advice. I'm just, you and I in the scheme. I see A group cyclists. They're the ones doing 25, 6, 7, waving goodbye. But for us, B minus group, or some would say C, but I think I'm in a solid, somewhere in there.
You're coming up on the tricycle.
Yeah,
aren't you?
I think, I'll be getting, no, with training wheels, so I'm taking them off. No, but I'm a B minus 20 to 22 guy, a little bit of 23. When they start getting on it up to 24 and 5, I'd keep it for a second, then it's goodbye. But there's a lot of you who are watching this who are solo riders. Be extra careful. I like having the extra eyes. I'll only go with the group. I personally will only go when it's the sun's up. I know some who ride with lights
5:30
later.
in the morning is pretty early.
And my buddies used to kid me, but it helps. To me, every bit counts. I wear the brightest yellow jersey I can find every time I cycle. And, of course, always the helmet, as you pointed out. But the main things that we watch out for each other, that we respect each other as motorists and cyclists. There's room for both. And the interesting thing, Brian, I will say the overwhelming majority of cars that go by, the motorists, are great. But, of course, it's the one or two that put your heart in the throat. And in fairness, occasionally, the cyclist who put a motorist heart in their throat because they blew through a red light. Or so it works both ways, but it's not going to be the idyllic situation you see when you cycle in Europe, but we can do better.
Absolutely.
And hopefully today. Final thoughts today, sir?
Well, just thank you for watching and listening. We appreciate it, and I hope you subscribe and come back again for the next episode.